Okay.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. My name is Dr. Gloria Bashir, and we are coming live from Masjid Al-Taqwa on the south side of Chicago, and I'd like to greet you with the greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome you to today's Talim Talk. So we're observing this month of March, Women's History Month. And we have an especially enlightening presentation from my dear sister, Dr. Constance Shabazz. So let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Shabazz. She is a physician originally from Chicago and who currently resides in Austin, Texas. And for over 40 years, Dr. Constance has been a social justice advocate, fighting for the elimination of health disparities in all communities. She is the president and founder of Health Resources Consultants. And in that capacity, she has served as the executive clinical consultant with over 300 health centers across the US and in the Virgin Islands. Dr. Shabazz received her medical degree from Southern Illinois University Medical School. She received her MBA and MPH from St. Xavier University in Chicago. And from 2001 to 2002, she was a public service fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, where she was awarded a Master's of Public Administration. In 2020, Dr. Shabazz founded the Salaam Community Wellness Center on Chicago's South Side in the Woodlawn community. With the help of a dedicated and committed team, this center is on track to open in late spring of 2021, providing a unique, innovative, integrative, and holistic model of healthcare to address the needs, the primary needs for residents in Chicago, as well as addiction treatment, mental health treatment, and nutritional services. So that is just a brief overview of all of the accomplishments of Dr. Shabazz. And it is with great pleasure that I'd like to turn this presentation over to her with her wonderful title as part of our conversations on Al-Islam, Modesty. What do clothes have to do with it? Thank you so much for listening. And I'm going to bring you Dr. Shabazz.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on this topic. I actually started a program about a couple of years ago called Conversations on Islam. And one of the things that we did was we did a questionnaire of Muslim women. What kind of topics or what issues are we struggling with that you want to have addressed, during khutbahs, during taleems, during, webinars that we were putting together for women. And so there was this recurring theme that had been coming up at that time about women's dress and modesty and how that all is interrelated. And I know you say, well, wait a minute, what does this have to do with anything related to all the health work I do? Well, to be honest about it, once we get through this process of, talking about this topic, you'll see that in some instances, it's actually a public health issue, because unfortunately, how women dress or how women are perceived in many societies have actually made them targets, has left them with, mental damage, in some instances, physical and even death. So we want to talk about this. This is a very, very serious topic. And, when I was putting this together, I said, well, we're in the midst of COVID. We're in the middle of the social justice issues and so many other things. I said, is this still relevant? And as Allah would have it, yesterday I happened to be listening to a radio program and this topic came up on the radio program. I said, so alhamdulillah, we will touch on some things that will help us to have a better understanding of the seriousness of this and how we can better be able to practice our deen without some of the unfortunate cultural encumbrances that we have sometimes. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do something called, I'm going to call it the modesty test. Okay. And this is something I did at a workshop a couple of years ago. So what I've done here is shown, I have a variety of pictures, oh, sorry about that, of sisters. And this is in images I put in Muslim women. So as you can see, there's a variety of displays of dress of Muslim women. I'm going to be very, very specific about, my words when I talk about this. And so one of the questions that I asked at this webinar we did, and it was a mixed group. It was males and females. They were young people and older people. And so I said, well, who is the most modest Muslim woman? If all you had to look at was these pictures, who's the most modest Muslim woman? And so a brother raised his hand. He said, well, first of all, I want to preface this by saying this. Now, this is not my opinion, he said, but I know brothers who would say that the sister with the burqa, the abaya, it would be the most modest Muslim woman, okay? Then I said, okay, well, and this is something I've added. I said, well, okay, so we have these Muslim men here, okay? And so I asked the question, who's the most modest Muslim man? Just looking at this picture. And I bet you that most of us would not put on would not say that, well, that they can select out a brother based on what he wears as to whether or not he is Muslim or not. As opposed to oftentimes the society ascribes to women their level of modesty and piety based on what they wear. And that's really an erroneous assumption about what modesty really is. So how do we define modesty? We just gave you two examples of what people wear. Is it a kamar? Is it a niqab, a burqa, a quarter? Is it somebody wearing a abaya, a thobe, a gura, an igal, a sawal, a shawal, a kameez, a turban, a kufi? Is that how we should be defining modesty? Well, or is it none of the above? So modesty, really comes from, in terms of the English translation of it, it comes from a Latin word that's called, that it is modestus, which means keeping within measure. I think that gives us a little insight where we're going with this. So I gleaned a couple of, several rather, definitions of modesty from English translation dictionaries. So here are a few for you to consider. So the quality of being modest is free from vanity, being self-centered and boastfulness. It's the regard for decency of behavior, speech, dress, and etc. And note there that dress was only one of the things that is considered part of modesty. Simplicity, moderation. And think of it, someone can have a beautiful dress that conforms to our Islamic standards, but it may be made of gold. It may be outlandish, ostentatious, and which takes away from the aspects of modesty that we, tend to attribute to certain types of dress. It is a state or quality of being moderate in the estimate of one's own abilities and accomplishments. In other words, not being braggadocious, okay? Going around, and I know, I put a lot of stuff out there about my background. Hey, sometimes you can't get away from it, but not being braggadocious about it. And a mode of dress and deportment, which intends to avoid the encouraging of sexual attraction in others. So what are some of the standards of modesty? Well, standards of modesty are culturally and context dependent and may vary widely. And I'm just going to give you an example. Nudity in some societies, and many societies, is considered indecent exposure. But when I was doing research on this, there's a group of Indian monks called the Digambara that renounced clothing for an aesthetic reason. So in other words, Asceticism is the absence from sensual pleasures for the purpose of pursuing spiritual goals. So they feel that to get closer to God or whatever their belief is, that clothing is something that's an encumbrance. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not promoting that, but I'm just giving you an idea, context of how we use the terms modesty. And it has to be thought of in terms of a context from the culture, the environment. But what about modesty in Al-Islam? Now, this is something I got from Dr. Amina Al-Din, who is a professor emeritus from DePaul University and one of our women Islamic scholars. So modesty in Islam, in a broad sense, represents our deportment and behavior. It represents our privacy and our social norms. It includes the avoidance of arrogance and self-centered attitudes that have pervaded our society. And it represents respect, protection, and accountability for the individual and their relationship with others. Modesty recognizes the avoidance of the violation of the body and personal space. And modesty focuses on humbleness and graciousness. And remember, we're talking about the clothes part, you see very little reference to that here, although there's inferences to it when we talk about things like privacy and avoidance of violation of the body and protection. We know that clothes can be a form of protection. I also came across a beautiful word, haya, okay? It's considered a major Islamic virtue and an integral part of human character. A person with haya is not a shameless person. He or she is chaste, moral, restrained, upright, and virtuous. Now, this doesn't mean the person is perfect, but these are qualities or behaviors that they aspire to. It's a dynamic thing. We should always be working on becoming modest, more aware of ourselves and how to exhibit all of these wonderful characteristics. But haya, then this is a really important point that I really gleaned from my reading. It is not morality to be imposed, but it's something that must arise within a person and collectively within a society. And what does this mean? What has happened far too many times in many so-called Islamic societies is that there's this imposition upon women to meet a certain standard, and that standard really may not really be a true standard of morality, but a proxy, or a proxy for morality and piety. So clothes and the way we dress expresses a form of modesty, but does not substitute or in any way totally represents modesty. And that's very, very key. So what is it? When we wear a certain dress, and this goes for sisters as well as brothers, is it a symbol of piety? Is it sometimes a symbol of terrorism? A symbol of defiance? A symbol of self-expression? A symbol of freedom or control? Or a symbol of oppression? And we have to take these things into consideration, because, particularly I would say for Muslim women, we are identified a lot of times, as one of those 6 things, or sometimes I'm going to say that the common word term is used, that there's an intersectionality between it, and so we have to be very careful about how we judge a woman, and based on how society may see them and react to them. Sister Gloria mentioned that I did a lot of travel. I worked as a consultant, a clinical consultant for the federal government. So oftentimes, before I left my home, I had to make very strategic decisions about what I wear. Okay, what I would wear, because I wanted to be sure, one, that I am adhering to what my understanding of modesty is with the Deen, but also I had to take in consideration the environments that I was going into. I went into a lot of blood red states. So I never knew who it was I was going to be meeting with or who I was going to be interfacing with. And so therefore I had to be sure that I'm not signaling to someone or raising some concern that may cause me some issues. So that did not mean that I, like I said, that I adopted a modest, immodest address code, but that I had to be aware of the environment that I was in. I remember hearing from some of the older Muslims, you know, and I can say I'm old now too, but older, I mean, you know, people that I met when I first came in the community, and talk about how the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, may Allah be pleased with him, and raise him up on the day of Jannah, that he advised sisters, particularly sisters who were working outside of the confines of the nation's businesses. He allowed for them to wear modest dress, but it was not identifiable dress, you know, connected with the Nation of Islam. And the reason why he did that, because he knew that these women could possibly be targets. You know, he said, as long as you are following the basic modest dress code, you know, he did not expect them to have the beautiful long flowing headpieces or any, or the uniforms like we used to wear. But he wanted to make sure that the women were protected, because that is the first element, you know, self-preservation, you know, so forget about trying to, you know, how would you say, send a message of who you are. It's about protecting. And so these are things that I always think about in terms of just my own personal decisions with regards to my understanding of modesty of dress. And remember now, that's only one component. So we talk about, you know, hijab, which means a covering, okay? And this actually predated Islam, okay? It was a way of distinguishing the elite women. And with the advent of Islam, it was used as distinguishing the believing women from non-believing women. And the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were basically held to a different status regarding dress than other women, and also even shielding themselves, you know, as you know, in the Quran, where it talks about, you know, the tone of a woman's voice, and whether or not she was actually seen by some of the people who were coming back and forth into the Prophet's home, you know, because, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, understands that, you know, people have some kind of, you know, they may have felt like, well, I could get close to the Prophet through his wives, you know, things like that. So these were forms of protection. I'm sorry, I moved something over here. Hold on. Yeah, so, but in recent years, we know that there's been a resurgence amongst sisters to wear the hijab, the burqas, the khimars, and the niqab. And this, a lot of times, was as a result of a rejection of Western influences and the loss of Western control that had been over, or Western influences in many Muslim countries. Women's choice has been, though, unfortunately, at odds with many men in these societies. And most recently, what I was referring to yesterday, there was a story about how now Switzerland is about to go through what they're calling it, ban the burqa. Okay, so some these right-wing extremists in what they call the People's Party, they want to ensure, check this out, equality for all women. And the problem is that here again, as we have seen, and I'm going to give you these other examples and go back to that statement, like in Iran, you know, at one time, women were legally required to wear hijab, and those who didn't conform were at risk for fines or detention. In Turkey, at one time, there was a ban on women wearing hijab in private and state university schools. And the ban was lifted in various sectors between 2008 and 2011. And see what the confusion is, that, you know, here, unfortunately, like I said earlier, the women are being used as proxies for piety. But yet it's men who determine whether or not what they wear is pious or not. And it puts women in a very dangerous situation in many of these countries, many of these societies. I mean, alhamdulillah, fortunately, we don't have that kind of pressure in our community. But I mean, sometimes we do kind of, you get the inference sometimes that we may have a little vestiges of that, okay? So what are some of these unintended consequences for women? As we mentioned, we talked about the killings, honor killings and acid attacks. And some of these actually occur here in the US, being used as political pawns. There's a statement, to see the face of a woman is a source of corruption for men not related to them. In Gaza, there were attacks on women in an effort to intimidate them from wearing allegedly immodest dress. Islamic State of Iran, women executed for not wearing niqab with gloves, verbal and physical attacks for wearing or not wearing Islamic attire. Discrimination in getting jobs, job promotions, and dress codes in the workplace. And women oftentimes are targeted by those who hold Islamophobic attitudes. So how do we get here? Okay, well, we know that some of these attitudes about women are not Islamic. Let's just call it like it is. That they have oftentimes come out of cultures that have continued use and to try to use Islam and their interpretation of what is modesty, modest dress, as a way of controlling women. My question to you is, well, what are the solutions? Well, I'm going to be a little simplistic here and say what my own interpretation is, what my own opinion is that the major solution, I believe, is let the women make their own decision. A sister once told me how she was in the masjid and a brother came up to her and he said, "Sister, why aren't you wearing some covering over your feet?" And the sister said, she told him, she said, "Brother, why are you looking? You have no right, to approach me about this. This is my decision. You are crossing the line, trying to impose on me, and you're looking at my body parts. You are denying my privacy." So I'm not saying that sisters should, start coming to the masjid inappropriate, but I harken back to when inappropriately dressed. But I harken back to when I was growing up. I grew up in a neighborhood that was probably maybe 25 or 30% of the residents were Catholics. And at that time, if you went into a Catholic church, it was expected that you were going to, dress a certain way. Particularly, it was thought that you had to wear some kind of head covering. Sometimes it would be just, it looked like a little handkerchief that, women would put on their hair, or they would cover their hair in a scarf. And even though I wasn't a Catholic, I remember the few times that I would go, that it would be, I would respect, I would honor the adab of the Catholic Church and make sure that I dressed appropriately. Of all the years that I've gone to masajid, I've seen, sisters who, maybe they were in transition to becoming Muslims, or they were guests. And it's an interesting thing that rarely have I ever seen someone come in looking inappropriate. It's just something about being in a certain environment that causes one to think in terms of how they should comport themselves, how they should dress themselves. But I think that we sometimes are putting, particularly our young sisters, at risk of putting a lot of pressure on them. A sister and I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and she said, well, I think they should wear the, kimar, hijab, regardless of how their feelings are at that time, their level of maturity. I'm talking about young sisters. And I took the opposite opinion. I think there was an old commercial, let the quality go in, okay, before the name goes on. And so I'm of the opinion that we should give our young women space, within reason, and allow them to develop the Islamic character. I know that there were times when I did not wear my hair covered. Part of that was the environment that I was working in and I was in school in. But over time, I said, no, this is my part of what I feel is my identity as a Muslim woman. And it was especially, this was around the time that, I happened to be in graduate school, actually in Boston, when 2 of the planes left there and went into the World Trade Center. And I felt that there was an affront against my deed. And I felt like I wanted to be visible. I want people to know, who I am, that I am a representation of that. And that's not with everyone. I mean, there's so many sisters out here doing fantastic things. And, but yet I see sometimes they're maligned because they don't have that look, that certain look. But yet it is their work. It is their character that we should be looking at. Those are the important things. That is the dress that we should be wearing. And that's what the Quran, that's what our prophet said. That's the dress that we should be looking at. So I pray to Allah that, I have not offended anyone, that whatever I have said, if there are any errors, I definitely assure that I accept that. And I pray to Allah that we can have some conversation in the next few minutes. I must tell you, though, I was double booked today, and I will have to leave, probably in the next 15 or 20 minutes. But thank you. May Allah bless each and every one of you. Assalamu alaikum. So any questions? Laura, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Dr. Constance. What an amazing presentation. Very enlightening. I appreciate that. And so now we want to open the floor up for questions. I see we have someone who's put in the chat. Thank you for sharing. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. Who'd like to engage in this conversation further with Dr. Constance? Ask some questions.
And let this be a conversation, because I don't have all the answers. This is a very charged topic that we're dealing with. Like I said, this is one sister's understanding, and I want to hear, your thoughts. And especially we'd like to hear from those parents who are out here who have young women. I think we need to hear, how are you doing? Because this is about family exchange. How are you dealing with this? The pressures on the society, the pressures on the society that they have, the pressures that are coming from our community. How are you dealing with it?
Well, I'm going to jump in, Dr. Constance, because I see we have a couple things in the chat box. And so I want folks to feel free to jump in, but I'm going to make a little comment first. First of all, I thought all of the ways that you define modesty were pretty amazing. Very informative. How modesty and piety are often defined by dress. But in reality, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your character, right?
No, absolutely.
And
you talking about that one you made? Oh yeah, I've been through one.
And so I also really appreciate your giving some commentary about the word haya, and as a major Islamic virtue, and how it is such an integral part of the human character. And so if you can talk a little bit more about haya, and even a little more commentary about that whole concept of modesty and piety.
Okay, we'll be here. Well, again, as I mentioned, that modesty is really a variety of things. We can express our modesty, like you said, through the way that we dress, but not just the way we dress. It is really more rooted in having a sense of the need to protect yourself, okay, and to protect your privacy. And what it brings with it is what we hope is a level of respect that goes along with it. It's a protection. Unfortunately, we've seen in societies where sisters can be in a full burqa, but yet they are still, I hate to say this, they're being raped, they're being killed, So it is a mindset, and it goes both ways. It's not just what you're doing, what you're wearing, but it also is how others see you. So I see haya as being really a societal thing, not just an individual thing.
Okay, that's excellent. If there are any questions, because I certainly don't want to take time away from those who may have some questions, but I do have another question, and that is, how can we as Muslim women begin to expand those who are not Muslim women, okay? Those who are not African-American Muslim women, how can we begin to expand their awareness of our cultural awareness and how that cultural awareness is going to look very different than their cultural awareness as Muslim women?
Wow. Well, you know, Dr. Gloria, you and I have been around a variety of women who we think the same. We're very spiritually connected, and some of them are not Muslim women. Okay, but I think it's by example. First of all, making people feel comfortable, and them learning about our deen, not forcing it on them, but letting them see what shared principles that we have. I think that's the best way to do that. You know, I know that there's a group of women that I have been around. I think we're working on 15 years, and we came together as a result of, I say, a personal need I had. And they have now, adopted some of the things, like even some of them have adopted fasting during Ramadan. You know, so I think it's through our example that we show people that we're not. And what I often do personally is I will, if I'm talking to someone, we're talking about a situation, I will reference the Quran. And a lot of times they would never have known that the Quran speaks to so many issues that they're dealing with unless somebody brought it to them in that way. Because we can't expect that they're going to pick up the Quran. So it's through our example, using opportunities as much as we can to share with them the culture, and to actually use our Quran and the Surah of Prophet. I'm sorry, the Surah of Prophet to show the examples of this great man and how they can use it in their lives, whether they call it Islam or not.
Yes, I agree. There are some comments in the chat box, and I'll just reference them now. One person is saying, if you call out a name of a person, then, oh, sorry about that. That was my direction. From Sister Anissa, thank you, Dr. Shabazz. Our Imam W.D. Muhammad addressed these issues before. He said we need to focus on the behavior and religion and not so much on dress. And she thanks you for your presentation. Another person, what are the rules in Quran about this? And can you speak at all to that? Some of the rules around dress, just from your perspective.
Well, okay. So we know that there's a certain length down to our wrist. Okay. We know that the length of clothing, but also there are other things that are implied about, how tight the clothing are. We don't want to be showing our body parts, And I'm going to say this in general because I don't want to get so detailed in this. When I think for most people, and let me explain to you what would happen to me when my husband was alive. May Allah be pleased with him. He was actually really my best measure of modesty. Okay, by being a man and knowing what men look at and how men react to, I found that was really one of the best measures of whether or not my dress was appropriate. Okay. And so I think that's critical to have, and he wasn't doing it in a critical manner. I was thinking about this the other day. I said, he would simply say something like, I think maybe you want to reconsider wearing that or wearing that way. Okay. And that meant so much to me because it gave me the feedback that even though I thought that I was appropriately dressed according to Quran, that it was still that extra set of eyes to let me know how would I, in the situations that we're going into, be looked upon, and how would people more likely respond to me.
think that's a good commentary. Dr. Aisha El-Amin has a question for you.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for that. I want to share a story and then kind of get feedback from you and everybody else on the call of how do you think we should address it? So of course I was born and raised a Muslim, and when I went over and I was in the military, then I came back, and when I came back I went to at least 10 different masjids, right? One masjid, I was not modest because I had pants on. Another, I had fingernail polish. They met me at the door with fingernail polish remover. Another one, my scarf was on, but it wasn't covering my neck. Another one, so it was one thing after the other, right? And that turned me off from going to the masjid. And alhamdulillah, I ran into our community in the Baha Center at that time that fully embraced me. But what I saw, even as I had children, there was another thing, that's not supposed to be done in masjid. Like, you're not supposed to, this is how it's supposed to be done. So we have these gatekeepers, right, of the deen who now I believe are really beautiful folks and brothers and sisters that really do believe that if you are not doing it this way, then you are going to hell. Like, they really and sincerely are trying to make sure that they give you this wisdom so that you don't go to hell, right? But it is off-putting. And so how do we as a community begin to lovingly move into a space where folks can grow and feel loved and feel supported and have education and information, but that also the folks that really these things are they burn their souls, like they don't want to be there if you are there and you have on fingernail polish, right? How do we also make them feel welcome? So what do we do as a community in terms of modesty and defining that and creating a space where all of those different viewpoints can coexist in a loving way?
Well, I think one thing is to have conversations about this. And sometimes, I mean, with all due respect, I know that sometimes it seems like we, and I'm just saying collectively, steer away from the everyday challenges and say, well, I don't have the answer to that, so I don't want to talk about this. And I think it's having those discussions, you know what I'm saying? And just respecting people where they are. You be an example. So if a sister comes in and let's say they're, inappropriately dressed for Juma, I remember times going to places where if I wasn't dressed right, somebody would hand me something or just ignore me altogether. And when I say ignore me, just not say anything. But I looked around and I said, well, wait a minute. I feel uncomfortable because I'm not dressed the way they are. Nobody had to say anything to me. The next time I came, I changed my dress. So I think it's by example. Sometimes I think it's just having those frank conversations. But I think, you have to be so careful about it, Sister Aisha, is that because you don't want to say something to someone what you feel is the right way to dress. And it differs from everybody else, what I'm saying. So we're having these conversations, but also showing it by example and treating people wherever they are. That's the bottom line. Treat them with respect.
That's an excellent comment. Are there any other questions or comments? I saw that, let's see. So Sanisa raised, she did a hand clap for you, Sister Dr. Constance.
Well, I'm going to say that this is not an easy topic, but that's why we started the conversations on Islam, because sisters needed a space to have these kind of conversations. There is no absolute, answers to these. I look at Islam as, I tell people, to me, it's like that garment that, it's in your closet. And every time that you have to go anywhere, that it's that garment that you can pick out of that closet and put on, and it's going to be appropriate for everything. You know what I'm saying? And so you have to feel comfortable in your understanding. Yeah, we can always make, tweak it a little bit, but as long as you're comfortable in that, and that doesn't mean you don't change over time. Like I said, I didn't wear my hair covered for a while. It had to come from me, not at me, to make those decisions. Because if it came at me, I probably would not have done it. but it came from within, and I felt that this is the right thing to do. I have a granddaughter, you know, I don't push her, you know, but I show through example, you know, how she should live. I don't push her because at the end of the day, that she is not going to believe because I tell her to believe. She has to believe because she has Allah has blessed her to believe. Allah makes Muslims, you know, we don't. We know that, you know, so it's not a thing. I know we're afraid because you know, sometimes we don't want to lose our children. We have so many influences right now. That's a far gone conclusion. You know what I'm saying? But what we should do is let them know that we're here for them, that we're going to support them through this, and they'll find their way. Look at us. You know, I think we're still finding our way, but alhamdulillah, we found our way. Alhamdulillah.
There's another question in here from Sister Angela. She joined in a little late and she's not sure whether this has been addressed, but what are your thoughts, Dr. Constance, regarding gently reminding the community at large that men and women should dress modestly, not just limiting that comment to women?
Allahu Akbar. I was thinking about this the other day. I said, well, you know, navel to the knees, you know, in a Speedo at Juma is not modesty, okay? So yes, brothers should adhere to that too, you know, even though you have, you know, certain, how would you say, permissions more than women in terms of what has to be covered. But yes, any person, you know, should be aware of how they physically dress and how they comport themselves in terms of their character and their behavior. So yes, I think that should be a reminder, you know, and that's one issue that we've had, is that so much emphasis has been placed on the sisters, you know, that the brothers, as I said, sisters feel like, hey, they get a pass. You know, there's a young sister here who I've got very close to, and one of the things she was always pushing back on her parents. She said, well, you know, you let your brother go out, my brother go out there with anything, you know, but yet you want to, you know, put me in a closet and say, you know, I can't wear a certain thing. You know, it's a balance, of course. But the thing is that be able to, you know, talk to both of them, and they should have a clear understanding of what is acceptable, you know, and how they look, you know, to other people, how people look at them. So it's, you know, like I said, it's a balancing act that we have to play. But yes, that it should be something that should be discussed. These should be some of the discussions that we have within our communities. They're uncomfortable, but they're necessary, because otherwise we're going to give, particularly our young people, we're going to give them the wrong impression, you know, that somebody is allowed to do something that they are, and explain to them, you know, our young sisters, we're in different kinds of situations than a lot of. In other words, we're not as protected out there in society. We're always in a position, not always in a position where it's as safe for us, you know. So we have to make sure that we are imparting to them that this is a protection for them, okay? And even in a way in which they congregate with each other, you know. A couple of years ago, we did a program we called it We Too, and we were talking to the Muslim community, because, you know, the sexual violence and stuff was happening in our community, and we weren't talking about it, you know. And so one thing that we tried to do is, you know, we tried to actually bring in our imams to try to teach them how to talk to the congregations about this. And unfortunately, when we did the program, we had one imam who come, one imam, because they were afraid to talk about these things. But we do have to talk about this. We have to protect our young people. They have to know that we mean business, and not just requiring to do the right thing, but actually providing them an environment that is protective also.
Just one other comment in our chat box from Dr. Aisha, and she says, no passes for brothers. So our brothers have to be accountable as well in their dress. I think that I really enjoyed your comments in terms of, you know, how we approach people. And I think that oftentimes, you know, we are so committed to what we feel is our deen and how we want to present ourselves, that we really don't allow space and grace for others.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And
and
Imam Tariq.
Go ahead.
No, Imam Tariq, I think your hand was up as well.
Thank you, Dr. Gloria. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Constance. Thank you so much. What you said, I mean, it all resonates very deeply. I couldn't help but think about a teacher of mine. We're talking about Islam. He says, people always talk about, they say, what does Islam say about so-and-so? He says, well, Islam doesn't say anything. Islam is within a cultural context, and, it's just so important for us to remember that when we're talking about things like modesty, that we're doing so from our cultural context, that, because modesty is, it does not have a universal representation. It's not, there's no uniform. Right. So I just tremendously appreciate what you've said and the thoughts that you've given. And, it's a lot to think about, and something that, us brothers, we're not exempt from, but quite often we're not a part of that conversation. But so just thank you, Jazakallah.
Sounds like another Talim for the brothers. Huh?
I see Brother Clyde's hand is up. I'm gonna take myself off of spotlight. Thank you.
Well, now that the brother had the nerve to jump out there, I'll bring this up. I had a really interesting conversation with my daughter during one of the, I would call it Muslim Paranoia series. I can't remember. It wasn't as far back as 9/11. It was more recently when there was a big anti-Muslim situation. And she was sharing with me that she'd had a conversation with my son-in-law about the danger that she was in. And he's from a different culture. They don't have the same history that we have. So when you brought up how the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used to advise the sisters going out, to work, how to dress, because they were constantly in that state. They weren't waiting for an international event. That was the state they lived in all the time. And I appreciate the legacy of common sense I got from that, that I hold on to and that the Imam actually expanded upon. And I had the conversation with her. I remember I said to her, I said, well, you can meet all the standards that he's talking about, and they won't even necessarily know you're a Muslim.
That's right.
And that's, if anything you should be doing, that's what you should be doing now. I mean, yeah, he's your husband, but you know what? I'm your father. And I'm not waiting for anybody to get to the point that they understand, that you have to protect yourself. And I said, there are hats, etc. But it was somewhere close in proximity to the funeral of our brother, Muhammad Ali. I said, so I just asked her, I said, do you think Muhammad Ali's wife was modest in the way she appeared at that funeral? She said, oh yeah. Do you think if she was walking down the street, just looking exactly the way she was looking, would anybody say, oh, there goes a Muslim woman, for sure? But they certainly would say, oh, there goes a modest woman, So, I said, with your knowledge of fashion, and my daughter is one who used to really love to shop. I said, I know you can come up with something that won't bring attention to you, but at the same time will make you feel comfortable that you're modest, in your attire. And I think that I don't think we think enough about how much more dangerous it becomes to the sisters when we go through these periods of time. Much more dangerous than it does for the brothers. For most of us, we get up and dress the way we've been dressing. If I dress for work, I'm pretty much meeting the quote unquote standards, and I just think that someone needs to be very clear in the expression of that, not just for the women in our community, but for all of the Muslim women in America, because they don't get that from their communities for the most part.
Yeah, recently, when there was the unfortunate beheading of a teacher in France, there was some Muslims in Chicago who were talking about putting up billboards and we're going to boycott French products and this, that, and the other. And I asked the question, I said, but who's going to get the blowback from that? More likely, it's going to be Muslim women. People say, oh, yeah, because we're so visible, So, it's just, don't put us out on Front Street like that. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I agree. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, that was amazing. There was a comment in the chat box from Ms. Elamine, and she wants to thank you, Dr. Constance, for expanding the definition of modesty, because she's a mother of a young daughter, and she feels like, you know, this is something that's ever present on her mind.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, yes. So, Dr. Constance, we're just a few minutes left, and I know that you need to exit because you are double booked and triple booked, as you always are. Busy life. So I want to really, really thank you. We all thank you for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your expertise with us, and your research. I mean, you really researched the topic, and you know, I feel quite enlightened. So want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you all, and may Allah bless each and every one of you. And I apologize, there is a program on women in business that CIOGC is doing, and so I'm supposed to be on a panel in a couple of minutes. So alhamdulillah, thank you very much. Like I said, I pray to Allah that you gain something from this. I apologize for anything and take full responsibility, anything that I said that was incorrect. And I want this to have been a conversation. I in no way try to intend to seem like I was an expert on this. A lot of this was my own interpretation, but you know, alhamdulillah, you know, thank you for this opportunity. I pray Allah that we'll be able to do this again soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And I'd like to ask everyone to please make sure that you are subscribing to Masjid Al-Taqwa's YouTube channel, and so that we can all continue to be updated on the happenings at Masjid Al-Taqwa. Thank you so very much, believers. Assalamu alaikum. We thank you. May Allah continue to reward us all and cover and protect us all, particularly in these perilous times of COVID. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, thank